All right, second graders, we're going to read two more chapters of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. We will start with chapter 27, Joy. Here we go. Joy had forgotten her lunch at home. It was lunchtime. She was hungry. She didn't have a meal ticket. If she had had a meal ticket, she could have had lunch from Mrs. Mush, the lunch teacher. She'd have to be terribly hungry to eat a lunch made by Miss Mush. Even an empty brown paper bag sack would taste better. But that's how hungry Joy was. Damien hadn't forgotten his lunch. He had brought a lovely turkey sandwich, a piece of chocolate cake, and a crisp red apple. All he needed was a glass of milk. He could get that from Miss Mush. Miss Mush didn't know how to ruin milk. Damien left his lunch on his desk and went to the end of the milk line. Joy didn't waste any time. She reached into Damien's sack and took out the apple. Then, but then she spotted the turkey sandwich. She put the apple back and took the sandwich and noticed the chocolate cake. She put back the sandwich and took out the chocolate cake. But then Joy had a second thought. She put back the cake. Then she grabbed Damien's whole lunch. First she ate the sandwich. It was in a baggie. When she finished the sandwich, she placed the baggie on Jason's desk. Next she ate the chocolate cake. It was wrapped in wax paper. She put the wax paper on Allison's desk. She ate the apple last. She placed the apple core on Dee Dee's desk. Then she put the empty sack on Kelvin's desk. Damien returned with a glass of milk. "Mrs. Jules, my lunch is gone," he called. "I wonder where it could be," said Mrs. Jules. "Kelvin took it," said Joy. "There's an empty sack on his desk." "Good work, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "Kelvin, I'm ashamed of you." She wrote Kelvin's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "Look, a baggie from Damien's turkey sandwich is on Jason's desk," Joy called. "Very good, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "But how did you know that Damien had a turkey sandwich?" "I'm just that smart," said Joy. Mrs. Jules wrote Jason's name on the blackboard under Kelvin's. "And there was wax paper from the delicious chocolate cake on Allison's desk," Joy announced. Joy had chocolate all around her lips. Allison stood firm. She looked at Mrs. Jules' eyes. "I didn't eat his cake," she said. "The evidence is there on your desk," said Mrs. Jules. Joy spotted it. She wrote Allison's name under Jason's. "Damien's apple core is on Dee Dee's desk," said Joy. "Very good, Joyce," said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Dee Dee's name under Allison's. "Damien, I think you ought to thank Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "She solved the mystery." "Thank you, Joy," said Damien. Just then, Louis, the art teacher, walked in. "I have your lunch, Joy," he said. "Your mother brought it. You left it at home." "You mean you didn't have lunch?" asked Mrs. Jules. "You must be very hungry." "No," said Joy, "not really. Since Damien didn't get to eat, he can have it." "Thanks a lot," said Damien. "You're the greatest." He ate Joy's lunch, an old bologna sandwich, and a dried up carrot. "Joy, for being such a good detective, and for being so generous with your lunch, you may help yourself to a Tootsie Roll Pop," said Mrs. Jules. "They are in the coffee can on top of my desk." Joy took one. Then, when Mrs. Jules wasn't looking, she took another. Kelvin, Jason, Allison, and Dee Dee had their names on the blackboard under the word discipline, but they were good the rest of the day. So at 2 o'clock, Mrs. Jules erased them. They forgot about the whole thing. Damien had a lousy lunch instead of a great lunch. But 5 minutes later, it didn't make much difference. He couldn't taste it anymore, and he was full. He went outside to play basketball and forgot about the whole thing. Joy had a great lunch and two Tootsie Pops. But 5 minutes later, it didn't make any difference. She couldn't taste it anymore, and she was full. And at dinner time, she was hungry just the same. But a horrible thing happened to Joy that she couldn't forget about. A horrible thing happened. Joy couldn't forget about flinching Damien's lunch. And for the rest of the year, every turkey sandwich, piece of chocolate cake, and Tootsie Pop tasted like Miss Mush's porridge. All right, here's the next chapter. We have Nancy. Oh, sorry, that's the picture. Chapter 28. Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jules's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think of it as a girl's name or a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of a quiet kid with big hands and big feet who sat over in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and shy. He was ashamed of his name. He only had one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for good reason. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. And they just called each other "Hey you" or just plain "you." Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was because then he might have to tell her his name. He never figured out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mark. Or you're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg. Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Max stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Oh, I think it's cute," said Mac. "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother has a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why they gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. "Ounds you, why not?" said Nancy. "Okay," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in the opposite direction until they were dizzy and they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said goodbye. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jules's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name's Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to meet you." "Mac," said BB. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, everybody. I want to trade," Jason called. "I'll trade you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, I'll trade you, Terrence," said Mauricia. Mauricia didn't like her name either. "No, he's trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you, Mauricia," said Damien. "No, thanks," said Mauricia. "I'll trade with you, Damien," said Mrs. Jules. "No, I don't want to be Mrs. No, I want to be Mrs. Jules," said Stephen. It turned out that nobody in Mrs. Jules' class liked their name. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy they fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anybody was. "What are we going to do, Mrs. Jules?" asked Leslie. "Who is really Eric Bacon?" "My name is not Mrs. Jules. It's Mauricia," answered Terrence. "Who was really Jason?" "It is not Mauricia," said Dee Dee. "Who was really Joe?" "You're both wrong," said Mauricia. "I'm Mrs. Jules." This went on for an hour. At last they figured out who was the real Rondi. She was missing her two front teeth. After they figured out who Rondi was, they were able to get Allison pretty easily. Then from there they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jules. She was the oldest one. Eventually they figured out who everybody really was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually they still are not absolutely sure. Everybody just decided to keep his own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, but when they were together, they still called each other "Hey You" or just plain "You." All right, and the next time we read, there's going to be just 2 chapters left, and we'll finish on one.